The series of damaging tornadoes sent sparks and debris flying across northern Alabama. The deadly storms reportedly trapping people in their homes. Powerful winds uprooted trees and sent them crashing onto rooftops or flattening them on their foundations. Some of the worst damage happened here at the Eagle Point subdivision in Shelby County, Alabama.
It was scary. The noise was unbelievable.
Carol Willis's garage damaged, but her home was mostly spared. She described the frightening moments the tornado barreled through her community.
I was standing in this window, the bedroom window, and I looked out and it started getting dark. I said, well, I better get out of this room. And I had a metal garbage can. I said, well, let me run to my utility room. I put the garbage can over my head, went in there. I stayed no more than 2 minutes. And I came out and I saw all of this. I couldn't believe it. It went so fast.
Also hard hit, Pelham, Alabama, just 20 miles south of Birmingham. At least 14,000 people in the area without power. First responders have been going door to door in this neighborhood. You can see they marked this door and there was a 0. There's no reports of any fatalities here, but at least 3 people were killed in Calhoun County, which is northeast of Birmingham. The folks here also are not going to get any rest because there are more storms in the forecast tonight. Lana? This is Noonan, Georgia, where a reported EF2 tornado with winds up to 135 miles per hour left a path of destruction. The tornado smashed the local high school, then kept moving, ripping the tops off of homes and splintering trees. At least 1 person was killed.
We're just praying for safety and to protect us.
Hours earlier, multiple tornadoes barreled through Alabama, ripping a gaping hole in the roof of this house. The storm killed at least 5 people in Calhoun County, east of Birmingham. Fallen trees kept Len Keener from driving back to his house after the storm, forcing him to walk through the damage to check on his wife. She survived, but his neighbor didn't make it.
I got here, then that's when I found the older gentleman up underneath this half of a house down there, and I couldn't get it up off of him. So the fire department finally got there and getting it off of him.
A powerful EF3 tornado raked across South Shelby County, shredding homes in the Eagle Point neighborhood. Carol Tomlin woke up from a nap just in time to hide in her bathroom as a tornado touched down.
I just got in the tub and put the pillows over my head and the blanket and just prayed. But I could hear hear things hitting the house, and the house was shaking.
Despite the extensive damage, no one in the neighborhood was killed.
Unrelenting rain hits already flooded regions in Australia's east. Some towns in the state of New South Wales now resemble islands, cut off by rising floodwaters and surrounded by debris. Those who didn't leave are stranded with no way out, including in Pitt Town, west of Sydney. Paul Zammit left in time, but has been watching as floodwaters rise around his home. Fencing, tools and cars already lost.
It really is. It's an absolute disaster. I'm not kidding. I don't know how I'll afford it.
Next door is a building company, underwater. Its owner already counting the costs.
It hasn't sunk in yet, but I feel pretty upset for ourselves and everybody else, I suppose, yeah.
The scale of this unfolding crisis is enormous. Thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes, many rescued by boat or helicopter, and areas declared natural disaster zones. Authorities say Sydney's largest dam will likely spill over for days, threatening highly populated areas.
People are using boats and kayaks to rescue animals and salvage anything they can from the floodwaters. The cleanup will be immense, and the damage bill is expected to tip into the billions of dollars.
Right now, the focus is on ensuring people and animals are safe. Rain is forecast to ease in the coming days, but the flood threat is expected to remain.
The strong warning we need to give people is please continue to be patient, because we envisage that even when the rain stops in some of these coastal communities, the rivers will keep rising.
People living in low-lying areas of New South Wales are no strangers to floods, but this one, many say, is unlike anything they've seen.
Welcome to the programme. Myanmar has seen its worst day of violence since its military seized power nearly 2 months ago. Local media are reporting as many as 50 people have been shot dead in the latest crackdown against anti-coup protesters. Now, that's on top of the 320 deaths that rights groups have confirmed since the start of the military coup. Although the true number is likely to be much higher, the violence coincides with a military parade in the capital, where the leader of the ruling junta pledged to safeguard democracy. Let's get the very latest from Tony Cheng, who's in Bangkok in neighbouring Thailand, just monitoring events for us from there. Tony, during the last few hours, we've been getting an ongoing, increasing death toll as that crackdown continues by the military.
Indeed, and it's rising quickly. We've been, it's very hard to get a really accurate impression. We were trying to do that earlier in the day, trying to double check and confirm these reports we were getting of fatalities. But as the day has gone on, the numbers have just been increasing faster and faster. It is, of course, very difficult to access information, in addition to which the internet is still blocked in many areas. But we do know the protesters went out very early this morning in Yangon. They've been out since 4:30 in the morning. Sorry, 2:30 in the morning. Then the security services moved in at 4 o'clock. We understand that 4 people were killed in clashes there in Dana and Yangon. In Lashio, in Shan State, several people were killed again when the protesters went out onto the streets. They were met, as they have been day after day, by volleys of tear gas, rubber bullets and live rounds. And in Yangon, in Mandalay, Myanmar's second city, the city is basically wreathed in smoke as the security services went in, first setting alight barricades the protesters have put in place around their neighborhoods to try and stop the security services getting in. And since then, we've seen lots of people both injured and dead. It follows a chilling warning that went out last night on Myanmar's state TV that people should not throw their lives away. The warning said that, but if they did come out in the streets today, they would be shot in the head or the back. And that's what we're seeing. A lot of these injuries and fatalities appear to be gunshot wounds to the head. We've also seen on social media lots of images of snipers in high emplacements all over the country.
And of course, this news all comes on the day that the Armed Forces Parade actually happened as well. A show of might and subliminal messages about who we are as a military and what we can do.
Absolutely. In fact, frankly, not that subliminal. We were expecting this to be a big day from the military. I think the protesters were also expecting it. They came out very early in the morning before the sun had risen in Naypyidaw, the capital. And on this huge parade ground, we saw armed vehicles, missile launchers, tanks. And then as the sun rose, thousands and thousands of soldiers representing all of the armed forces. But of course, while this is a day that celebrates Myanmar's military sort of glories of the past, the biggest battle today concerning the military is the battle against its own people on the streets of towns and cities all across the country. We saw the junta's leader, General Min Aung Hlaing, come out. He said that the military was put in this position, trying to paint the military as the guardian of democracy, saying that they'd been put in this position and they'd carried out the coup illegally because of unlawful acts by the NLD, the party led by Aung San Suu Kyi. But of course, he presented no arguments, as he hasn't done since the coup. And again, I think we can see from the reaction of the protesters out on the streets who are risking their lives to...
They escaped carrying whatever they could from their battered homes. 4,000 Venezuelans are seeking shelter in Colombia's border town, Arauquita, following days of clashes and bombings between Venezuela's military and a Colombian armed rebel group. Many say the Venezuelan soldiers were abusive during the attack.
It was very painful to see how the soldiers aimed a gun at a mother. The government is taking away our lives. In one house, a grandfather died, an 8-year-old boy died, a 9-year-old girl and her mom. The situation was terrible.
Among the refugees are indigenous people, children, seniors and sick people. They're being hosted in makeshift camps that are overwhelming the capacity of this small town to help them. and more arrive every day.
In the last 36 hours, another 800 people arrived and have been screened. But our capacity to respond to this wave of migration, this humanitarian displacement, has already been exceeded.
These are the few available pictures of the aftermath of one of the attacks inside Venezuela. The Venezuelan government says 2 soldiers died in the operation and at least 32 people were arrested, blaming Colombia for its failure to control the armed groups operating at the border.
Our Bolivarian military forces are hitting drug trafficking organizations that are useful to the Colombian government and the North American empire in their continued assault on Venezuela.
A river separates the 2 countries that have cut diplomatic relationships in 2019. The Colombian government has repeatedly accused Venezuela of harboring in their territory residual rebel groups from Colombia, such as the ELN and dissidents of the former FARC. But some experts believe that these latest fightings show that the relationship between Venezuela and at least some of these groups is now breaking down.
Old and new guerrilla groups are operating in Venezuela, fighting to control coltan mining, gold and cocaine trafficking. The fact that they're fighting each other, recruiting children and threatening people has broken a fragile balance, and the Venezuelan government's tolerance of their activities which forced them to intervene.
Colombia announced it has increased the number of troops at the border to 2,000. Locals say clashes continue on the Venezuelan side in an escalation that promises to further inflame tensions in an already volatile situation.
A small glimmer of hope for global shipping as renewed efforts to refloat the huge vessel stuck in the Suez Canal could see it freed within days. This, according to the Dutch firm working to dislodge the container ship using a combination of heavy tugboats, dredging and high tides. On Saturday, the chairman of Egypt's Suez Canal Authority said that the stern and the rudder of the ship had started moving on Friday night, but added that he could not lay out a set timetable for freeing the ship. He did, however, shed some light on the cause of the grounding.
It might have been a technical human error, which will be revealed through the investigation. Many errors might be the cause, but we cannot prove anything yet. The only clear cause is that there were strong winds and a sandstorm, but this is not the only one, as others will be revealed during this investigation.
The maritime traffic jam caused by the stranded ship has grown to more than 300 vessels. About 15% of world shipping traffic passes through the canal, and currently the grounding is holding up some $9.6 billion worth of cargo each day between Asia and Europe. If the fresh attempts to refloat the ship are unsuccessful, hundreds of containers will have to be removed from the front of the vessel to lighten it, making it easier to pull free.
One last chance to be with their father, Pedro Capilla. He died after being diagnosed with COVID-19. For Pedro's wife, life without him seems unimaginable. Pedro is now one of some 200,000 people to have succumbed to the virus in Mexico. However, there are fears that the country's real death toll could be much higher. Mexico has the 3rd highest COVID mortality rate in the world, trailing behind the US and Brazil. As the country passed this grim milestone, President López Obrador says he's determined to accelerate the country's vaccination rollout before Mexico is engulfed by a possible 3rd wave.
Es muy claro lo que se está reflejando desde que inició la pandemia. Vamos a la baja de la segunda ola, pero no queremos un repunte. Ya, queremos que desaparezca o que sea mínimo el daño que cause la pandemia.
The country has received 6 million vaccines so far. Many of the shots being administered are from 2 Chinese drug makers, Sinovac and Sinopharm. The lack of data on the vaccine's efficacy has attracted plenty of suspicion, but many in Mexico just feel lucky to be vaccinated at all.
Que uno se vacune con la vacuna que es suficientemente buena, que le va a dar a uno seguridad. Estamos bien con esta que fue la que nos pusieron.
Mexican authorities are pushing for everyone over 60 in the country to receive their first dose by the end of April.
This is the main cemetery in Mogadishu, and it's filling up fast.
mostly with people who are said to have died from COVID-19 complications. This family is just the latest to bury a loved one. Somalia is struggling to deal with a second wave of COVID-19 cases, but health experts say with limited testing and data collection, it's hard to know the true extent of the pandemic here.
For the past 2 months, we have buried just over 1,000 people. Not all of them have died of the disease, but these are numbers we never witnessed before the pandemic.
Hospitals like Di Martini, an isolation center, are also overwhelmed, and oxygen is running out. Somalia has one of the world's most vulnerable health systems. The World Health Organization says just about a quarter of Somalia's 15 million population can access basic health care. Doctors are worried the situation is getting worse.
People do not believe in the existence of the COVID-19 virus in Somalia. Once they get sick, they first use traditional medicines to self-treat. By the time they are coming to the hospital, they are critically ill.
The government has rolled out a vaccination program. Health workers, the elderly, and people with underlying conditions are getting their first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine under the UN-backed COVAX initiative. The government hopes to vaccinate at least 20% of its population as soon as possible. But despite the severity of the situation, enforcing health restrictions has been difficult. These are some of the city's popular cafeterias. People are reluctant to socially distance or wear a mask.
First and foremost, we are Muslims, and our religion tells us that when people become very sinful, some unknown diseases will spread around the world. Only God can protect His people.
Apart from the pandemic, Somalis also continue to face the threat of violence from Al-Shabaab, a humanitarian crisis caused by recent flooding and a desert locust infestation that has left around 2.6 million without enough food. Some are hoping the vaccinations will help prevent new infections, but with only a fraction of the population able to access medical help, there are fears things might get worse. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera. The Biden administration has set a new goal to administer 200 million vaccine doses in the president's first 100 days in office. That's double the original goal. And as vaccination efforts continue to ramp up, Pfizer has started testing its vaccine on children 12 years old and younger. These trials are seen as an important step toward getting kids vaccinated and achieving herd immunity. So for more on this, let's bring in Dr. Bob Lahita. He's the director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health and a professor of medicine at Rutgers and New York Medical College. Thanks for joining us again on this Friday, Dr. Lahita. What are researchers going to be looking for specifically as they test these vaccines on kids, and how will the testing be different than the trials for adults?
Well, they're not going to be that much different, Anne-Marie. They're looking at different doses. You know, a patient who is an adult, say, over the age of 20 will get a vaccine with maybe 100 micrograms of the viral messenger RNA. With regard to a child, that dose may have to be made smaller. So the microgram amount is probably not as necessary as it is in adults to achieve perfect immunity. So that's what they're looking at. From 6 months to 12 years of age now, this whole population is vital, especially in schools, you know, with teachers being very concerned, et cetera. So it's going to be a really, really wonderful thing to achieve our herd immunity by having our children vaccinated.
Dr. Bob, Pfizer also announced this week that it has started a clinical trial of a pill to treat COVID-19 here in the U.S. The company says the pill is a similar type of drug that's used to treat HIV and hepatitis C. What is this pill and how does it work?
It's a protease inhibitor. Now, we've talked about protease inhibitors in the past with regard to HIV, as you mentioned, and the big boom to hepatitis C was to have a protease inhibitor. Protease is an enzyme or a chemical within the virus that allows it to replicate. It's actually within the cell as well that allows it to replicate and multiply. And if you inhibit that virus, that protease, you stop the replication of the virus. And going forward, you know, if we're going to have this infection for many, many years. And so a protease inhibitor would be a perfect thing to make available to a person who, say, gets this virus in a year or two when herd immunity has been achieved, but the virus is still going to be out there.
So, Doctor, people who have gotten the COVID-19 vaccine have reported swollen lymph nodes in their armpit area. So we want to be clear that the vaccines are not causing cancer, because sometimes the swollen lymph nodes can be a sign of breast cancer. So some people are getting mammograms and they're seeing something very concerning on the screen, and it turns out it's really just a side effect of the shot. Why is this happening, and what do people need to know when they do go in for screenings?
Well, first of all, it's a normal reaction to the presence of a foreign substance like a virus. And if the arm is, say, the left armpit lymph nodes can swell. This doesn't happen in everybody, but it happens in a good majority of people. And so when they look at the mammogram and you see those big lymph nodes, you want to first rule out cancer. So they biopsy the lymph node. And I've had a few patients who've had biopsies, and they're always benign. It just is what we call, a transformational, hypertransformation of the lymph node immunologically in response to the antigen. So what we're saying is, if you get a mammogram, you should wait at least 4 to 6 weeks after your second injection before getting your mammogram study. And this way, if the lymph nodes are enlarged, and you have to tell your radiologist and your doctor that, I just had my shot. So if the lymph nodes do swell up on one side, the side that you're usually injected on, we'll know what it is.
So there's also an interesting study from Northwestern Medicine, Dr. Bob, that found that most COVID-19 long haulers show 4 or more neurological symptoms for 6 weeks or more. Some of these symptoms can really have an effect on a person's quality of life. I have a friend who told me yesterday she was positive for COVID-19 early last year, and she still hasn't regained her full sense of taste yet, and it's been several months. So how could this virus affect people's sense of taste long after they've overcome it, and what could be going on in the brain?
Well, this is really interesting, Vlad, because, I suspect about 2,000 times the amount of virus is present in the brain as in the rest of the body. And it takes a while for the immune system of the brain to stop thinking that it is infected when you have particles of virus that are circulating about. So I hear most commonly, and these are the neurologic symptoms that people talk about: brain fog, certainly headaches, numbness and tingling of their hands and feet, disorders of taste and smell. And just yesterday, I had a patient who said, I haven't smelled anything normally or tasted my food in over 6 months. This is a real problem. It reflects the immune system's response to the virus in the brain, which, as I said, seems to have a concentration of the virus in some people. Muscle pain, dizziness is also common. And then, there's also the shortness of breath, the inability to walk up and down stairs without feeling like you've just lifted a 50-pound weight. All of these things we're seeing in the long haulers. And I'm setting up a clinic, actually, called a post-COVID clinic, to see these patients and advise them appropriately. Vlad.
There's a nonprofit hospital group in Michigan that says hospitalizations are actually up 800% for unvaccinated adults between 40 and 49 in their state, and hospitalizations of adults between 30 and 39 are up 633%. We know Michigan is seeing a spike. Older people are being hospitalized less, however, and the group credits vaccines for that. But, what could be causing so many more severe cases of COVID-19 for sort of younger adults?
Yes, Anne-Marie, well, we have the variants, and everybody talks about the variants. There's a South African variant, there's a British variant, and these variants are highly transmissible. And I suspect, this is my opinion now, I suspect that these variants are affecting.
A lucky escape on the first day of Easter Holy Week. This neighbourhood in Makassar was rocked by an explosion near a Catholic cathedral as worshippers packed into the church for Palm Sunday Mass.
Suaranya? Getarannya jangan ditanya lagi. Yang jelasnya bergetar sampai dampaknya kaca-kaca hotel itu berjatuhan.
After being intercepted by a security guard, a suicide bomber detonated his explosives at the gates, injuring several people. Authorities said that there were 2 suspects and that casualties would have been far higher if the explosion had happened by the church's main gate and not a side entrance.
Pada saat terjadi pergantian ibadah dari ibadah yang kedua ke ibadah yang ketiga. Nah, jadi pelaku bom bunuh diri ini berusaha untuk masuk ke dalam lokasi gereja kami. Nah, pada saat itu salah satu petugas keamanan saya melihat ada sesuatu yang mencurigakan.
Holiday periods such as Easter are a particularly risky time in the country, which has struggled with the threat of terrorism in recent years. Its worst ever attack was the Bali bombings in 2002 by Indonesia's largest jihadist group, Jama'ah Islamiyah, which is loyal to Al-Qaeda. But there are many other smaller organizations, including Islamic State-inspired Jama' Ansarud Daulah. In 2018, JAD attacked 3 churches and police, killing over 30 people. And in 2016, it attacked a Starbucks in Jakarta, leaving 8 dead and dozens more injured.
In nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo.
Pope Francis is ordering cardinals at the Vatican to take a 10% pay cut and reducing the salaries of other clergy in an effort aimed at saving jobs there. The coronavirus pandemic is hitting the Vatican's income hard, and the Pope has often insisted that he does not want to lay off anyone. A spokesman said lower lay employees would not be affected by the cuts, such as ushers, cleaners or firefighters. Cardinals who work at the Vatican and live there or in Rome are believed to get salaries of about 4,000 to 5,000 euros a month. Many live in large apartments at well below market rents. The pandemic has forced the Vatican Museums, a traditional cash cow, to close for much of the last 15 months. And the Holy See, the central administrative body of the worldwide Catholic Church, may have to use 40 million euros in reserves for the 2nd straight year. It expects a deficit of about 50 million euros this year. Programmed pay rises will also be suspended until March 2023.
Pope Francis was explaining the role of Our Lady in salvation history and the use of the title co-redemptrix to describe her. Mary is a mother, he said, and that's why she helps and protects us.
Ma come madre, non come dea, non come corredentrice, come madre. È vero che la pietà cristiana sempre le dà dei titoli belli, come un figlio alla mamma. Quante cose belle le dice un figlio alla mamma che vuole bene, quante cose belle. Ma stiamo attenti, le cose che la Chiesa, i santi le dicono, le cose belle a Maria, nulla togliono della unicità redentrice di Cristo, e Lui è l'unico Redentore. Sono espressioni di amore come un figlio alla mamma, alcune volte esagerate, ma l'amore, noi sappiamo, sempre ci fa fare cose esagerate, ma di amore.
Pope Francis recalled how Our Lady accompanied Jesus on Calvary. In the same way, Mary accompanies those who die alone, exactly as is happening during the pandemic.
Maria è stata ed è presente nei giorni di pandemia, vicino alle persone che purtroppo hanno concluso il loro cammino terreno in una condizione di isolamento senza il conforto della vicinanza dei loro cari. Maria è sempre lì, accanto a noi, con la sua tenerezza materna. Le preghiere rivolte a lei non sono vane.
When he greeted Polish faithful following the audience in streaming, the Pope mentioned how civil and religious days for life are being celebrated in Poland.
Pregate affinché in tutto il mondo ci sia una rinnovata sensibilità nelle coscienze, nelle famiglie, nella Chiesa e nella società riguardo al valore della vita umana in ogni tappa e in ogni condizione.
Pope Francis also recalled several tragedies that have struck him recently, like the over 130 people who were murdered during an attack in Niger and the terrible floods in Australia.